Hi, I'm Steve Robinson. I'm here to do a video for Shiva at the convenience store. I'm going to give a review of what's brought me to where I am now. And I'm going to start at the very beginning with a brief review of what happened when I was in my primary school days. My parents, their advice to me was just do the best you can. And that's kind of what I did, I guess. Didn't go very well though, because when I left one school, my parents moved to a different area. My parents went for an exit interview with the principal, and he said, "Well, Mr. Robinson, I don't really know your son. We're a large school, and unless they're either very good or very bad, I don't know them. Your son is of no academic concern, and so I'm afraid, to be honest, I don't really know him." Now, my dad's a blacksmith, so to him, no academic concern. That's pretty good, actually. So we moved, went to the new school, and turns out that I was actually an academic concern. I wasn't a straight line to failure. I was years below the rest of the class. So they put in place some strategies and did what good schools do. This actually had a big influence on me. And at the end of the story, I'm actually an academic success. I've got a degree and stuff like that. This is Mai. She's one of my kids. I've got four. You might see them all on the picture at the back. This is actually one of my more quiet moments. I generally get a couple of hours on a Saturday when mum's taken the younger, usually the two girls, off to ballet. But I've got myself some notes here that I may or may not refer to as we go through. And that's typical of my approach at the end. My state now is have a plan, reason your way through a plan, go into any given situation with a plan, but it's all just tentatively held. And so you drop the plan if intuitive guidance comes up. If nothing comes up, then you have a plan in place. What I'm trying to do is explain how I've come up to that and what that actually means. So I've gone through primary, and then it comes to what's called 11 plus. Back in England in the day, they had an exam. If you passed the exam, you went to the grammar school, the school for clever kids. If you failed the exam, you went to alternatives, shall we say. Because I wasn't really academic, my parents put me into the Christian school, which you didn't have to enter an exam to get into, and so they thought that was a good idea. And that's where I made what I think was really my first mystical or spiritual decision. I just said, no, I'm not going. I'm not going to go into the Christian school and be indoctrinated. Now, up to that point, I'd always been really compliant, and they were really surprised how adamant I was that I was going to take my 11 plus, come what may. So I did. They put me in for the exam, obviously not expecting me to pass. And after the exam, my dad said to me, "How was it?" I said, "Oh, it was easy. It was brilliant. They gave me a pencil too." And that's what I remember about the exam. They gave me a pencil. Exam results came, and I'd actually passed. So I ended up going to the grammar school, and I was, my local friends, because I was now growing up in an agriculture environment, friends going up the farm and stuff, started calling me Brains because I'd actually got into the clever school. There were 5 sets, A, B, C, D, E, and I was in D, which was actually a lot better than I'd expected. Now, I've never been academic. I've struggled. I'm not really that bright, and any academic success that I've had has always come through having to work hard. And that's what I'd done. I had to work hard, and I did. Managed to get myself up from set D to set B, and hey, that was good enough for me, mate. I was doing the best I could. Went through and got all my education, got into university, great. Whilst I was at university, that's where I started to actually seriously look back on what I'd done so far and where I wanted to go in the future, what was life all about, and all these other questions. And I came across, apparently by chance, Paul Brunton's book. I was a student, I didn't have an awful lot of money, and I went into a bookshop, and there was a book on sale, Paul Brunton, and it was titled The Hidden Teaching Beyond Yoga, which struck me as a pretty interesting title. I bought it, and well, he formed the foundation of my understanding. I'm going to just refer to my notes and see what I've got about this. His core teaching was that you have to have a synthesis. There are three aspects to the human being, and a correct metaphysics for understanding the human condition must cover those three. That is thought, that means metaphysics. You've got to study metaphysics. He presented very well an idealist metaphysics called mentalism. Feeling, that's mysticism, meditation, mystical experiences, understanding what mystical experiences are. Specifically, it's important to appreciate that colouring of a mystical experience. Each of us has our own up-to-date conditioning that will affect how we experience a mystical experience. And so whenever you or anybody else has a mystical experience, you're always on the lookout for colouring. And action. He introduced me to this idea that a metaphysics that does not apply to the waking world is not a metaphysics of the human condition. We're here in the world and we need to live in the world. We need to act. So the fourth aspect, you've got your thought, your feeling, your action, but the fourth aspect was balance. If you balance all these three in the individual, then you open what he calls insight, which is a latent capacity. And that was the model. He gave me some great ideas. He introduced me to the idea of truth being absolute, which means anything that's changing is relative and not truth. So that's fundamental, and up to this day, that's still my hardwired gauge for truth. He introduced me to what I thought was an incredibly powerful position called a dual perspective. In order to understand reality, you have to understand both aspects simultaneously. That's the ultimate and the relative, both simultaneously. And there's not a paradox because you split them into two levels of understanding. In any given situation, you can apply either or both. And one quote that really struck me was what he called a unique approach to life. He said one of the greatest, most direct ways of improving or moving towards truth and understanding is a unique approach to life. And he didn't say what he meant by that. Now, even at this age, I'm just around 20 or so, I'd already had some, not mystical experiences, but this unique approach to life. Like, for example, when I refused to go to the religious school, I actually did so because I had a sense that if this religious idea of God is true, then I don't buy it. I don't buy it, no way, because I said at the time, this is when I was like 10, 11 years old, I said, well, my dad's smarter than God because my dad says just do the best you can. And it's not fair if God expects me to be able to do all this and all that, and he's not going to tell me what the rules are. That's not fair. I don't buy that. My dad's cleverer than God. And I didn't expect to pass the exam, which, as I've already said, I did. I just said, well, it's up to God. If God wants me to pass, I'll pass. If God doesn't want me to pass, I won't pass. Who cares? It'll all be all right. It'll be all right, but I am not going to be indoctrinated. And this was at 10, and I don't know where it came from. It just came up. And when I felt that, I thought, that's it. I don't care. I knew somehow that that was what I wanted to do. And then here I am, all this time later. I've been through education and I'm in quotes an academic success. Never got a top grade in any external exam in my life. I'd always had to work hard, and I'd done all right. I'd pass, but you know, unjust. And here I am coming across this unique approach to life, and I thought, well, that could be what he's talking about. Just live your life as if there is some ultimate beneficent power and it'll all be all right. So I did. And he also introduced me to the idea of fate and destiny. Fate and destiny, two different aspects, one of which is self-earned, one of which is going to happen whatever you do. And so certain things are going to happen whatever you do, other things, if you like, karma. So you can have both the karma, which I've come across in Oriental teachings, plus, if you like, predestination. They're not necessarily as contradictory. So these are the ideas that he gave me. And the last Brunton idea, what he presented, he described as being a structure to hold thought steady in a conceptual framework to point beyond thought at the truth. In other words, it's not truth. You can't get truth through thinking, but what you can do is you can point at truth through thinking, right? And I lied. There's one more thing. Um, he gave me this metaphysics called mentalism, which is an idealist system where we have the world mind is effectively God, and the world that we experience is in the mind of God. And it works, as he said, for n+1 minds, where n is the number of sentient minds, plus 1 is the world mind. And I thought that's really good, because one of the things that I was struggling with around this time in my early 20s was the solipsism. How do I actually know other people are like me? And of course you don't. You can't be sure of it. And this n+1 idea seemed really good. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter if other people are sentient individuals like me or not. So there I am. That's my background. This is my framework, just as I'm leaving university. I decided to adopt this unique approach to life in the real world. No more student in a comfortable, secure little environment where you can basically intellectually fantasize. Let's do it. Let's get out there and actually live life according to this principle. So my parents had gone off to Africa and opened up a business in fishing, working with a friend of theirs. They'd done so for a year and it was basically falling apart. So they rang me up. I'd just been to Africa myself whilst they were starting this up. I'd been off doing voluntary service overseas because I'd qualified as a teacher, and gone back to England. They rang me up and said, if I want the business, I can have it. So, wow, what a brilliant opportunity. I'll go be a fisherman in England. Sorry, in Africa. So I did. I went off and I spent 10 years there. I did 10 years in Africa as a fisherman, running a business on the principle of karma, if you like. I ran the business on principles of doing what I thought was the right thing. Not as everybody else running small businesses in Africa was doing, screwing anybody you can for anything you can, right? Now, in that cutthroat environment of poor country, a lot of corruption, a lot of issues, basically, if you're going to make business succeed in Africa, you can do it anyway. That was what I thought, and so I put it to the test. This was another idea that Brunton had introduced me to, that your living experience is your laboratory for your test. Test yourself in your living experience. So I did, and it worked brilliantly. It was off of the scales. I ran a fishing business. One of the first things that we did, we came up with the idea, no fish, no pay. If you don't catch a fish, you don't pay a penny. Can't say fairer than that, right? And we ran the whole business on this principle. It went phenomenal. In the end, I left that. But what this had done over that next 10 years, this was like my early 20s to early 30s, it had really cemented in my experience that there is a karmic principle behind the universe. And multiple experiences confirmed this to me. I'm not going to go into specifics now, but just the big picture that I could actually make my own business in Gambia according to this. And I was a fisherman. I love fishing. To actually be paid to do what you love. My office was the boat. I had a mobile phone on the boat, and that was literally my working office. It was brilliant. So 10 years later, I'm now pretty much confirmed that I'm hot on the trails of reality, if you like. I understand how the world works. I've got a very detailed metaphysics that I can test in reality that in my experience has worked. Come back to normality, if you like. I've been a fisherman for 10 years, and now I want to get married, want to have kids, want to get a job. So I've gone back into teaching. Whilst I'm doing that, starting a family and getting a conventional life going, well, relatively conventional, I'm still traveling around the world. I've not gone back to England. I'm an expatriate teacher, married to an African girl that I'd met whilst I was in Africa. Um, I start to work on the development of my own metaphysics, my own understanding of metaphysics, not copying what Brunton's told me, which seemed to work. I actually took on an identity, if you like, on a materialist atheist forum, Richard Dawkins' forum it was called, and I went on there as an idealist theist. Now, I wasn't really a theist, but I just made out that I was in order to challenge people's views. I posted thousands and thousands of comments on that, spent a long time on there in order to specifically practice my material, my metaphysics, my argumentation, make sure that my theory of life, if you like, actually worked and actually was watertight, was rational, because of course your strongest critics are the people that make you really hone your ideas. So I did that for a decade or more, and it collapsed. The Richard Dawkins forum collapsed. I could see that my ideas had developed a lot, and so I joined another materialist atheist forum and continued doing the same thing with a lot of the same people. Um, the next main shift was when I discovered Roger Castello. Now, up to this point, I've got a very good metaphysical understanding. I've honed my skills in metaphysics. I've never been particularly bright, but work at it, right? Keep working at it, and you can do a lot of things. The mind, the brain is a very elastic thing. So I come across Roger Castello, and he presents these teachings basically on how to stop suffering, how to stop suffering in the human life. And it fits perfectly with my metaphysics. It's presented from a different angle, but it's kind of obvious. It's like trivially obvious, so it seems to me. So he has a practical approach, very much like my own. If it doesn't work in real world, it ain't no good. He gives me some, what I can see, are relatively simple tools with which to remove suffering, and then it's up to me to do it myself. So I did. And I would estimate a couple of weeks later, I'd no longer suffering. I've removed suffering from my experience. Brilliant. I mean, that was pretty cool. But that wasn't enough. Although I no longer suffered, I was still seeking. I was seeking because, yeah, I've got a good idea. I've got a lot of metaphysics, but it's theoretical. Yes, I've had mystical experiences. I've never actually seriously done much meditation. Formal meditation, but I didn't need to, because you see, Brunton, what he taught about meditation was the only real purpose of um, mind control meditation is to achieve concentration. Once you've done that, you don't need the mind control meditation. The mind control meditation is to achieve mind control in order to apply it to metaphysics. Now, because I've been having to work so hard as a student all my life, I was used to concentrating hard for long time periods. I had to, otherwise I wouldn't have been academically successful. So I had concentration. I didn't need to practice for concentration. I'd apply concentration to metaphysics and physics, which is what I was interested in, what I teach now. And what happens is you're contemplating a physics question or a metaphysics question. You run through the reasoning, and then you get to the point where your reasoning stops. You don't know what the next step is. You've gone A, B, C. You're thinking what's the D, but you literally stop and wait. Now, what that means is that time and time again, I would find myself at this waiting stage where I'm not asleep, but my thinking is on pause. And what I would occasionally do when I was on that pause, waiting for the next step, you realize that what's actually going on here, your attention is waiting for the next point, the next rationally obvious point to present itself from somewhere. And when it does, you grasp it and bring it down to earth, if you like. You take your intuition and you make it fit into your path of reasoning. And this had not come through meditation. This state of being passive awareness had come through metaphysics, through concentration, through academics. I forgot what I was saying now. But anyway, I got to Roger Castello. I've quit suffering and I'm still seeking. So as a seeker, what I wanted was not the end of suffering, because the end of suffering, I could see that I've already finished suffering. I understand where suffering comes from. I can see the mechanisms in me and others. Once you've brought the mechanisms to conscious awareness, it dissipates. And I've done that. I'm no longer suffering. I can identify the suffering in others arising, and it just doesn't arise in me. It's just not an issue, but it's not enough. I'm not there yet. There's still more. My metaphysics, I have a great metaphysics, but I don't actually have more than intellectual metaphysics. So intellectually, I get it. Intellectually, I get it. Experientially, I kind of get it. I don't suffer. Buddha says the end of suffering is enlightenment, or words to that effect. But I'm still missing something. It's not quite complete somehow. So I decided it's time that I try and move through this, see what the issue is. So I made up what I thought was a really carefully worded, precise email. It was quite a lot of words in it. I don't know, maybe 1,000 words or so. I was used to doing long, detailed explanations of my position, having come through the atheist forums. And I sent this off to Roger Castello. And surprisingly enough, he replied. And he said it was a great email, but basically he was too busy at the moment, and he'd get back to me on, I think it was on a Tuesday. He said, so remind me on Tuesday. Tuesday came around, and I dropped him off a private message reminding him, and he said, sorry, I'm too busy. So it's like, oh, shit. Oh, well, all right. And I'd actually spent quite a lot of time chatting with Roger Castello one-on-one in private messages, and he'd helped me a lot. He was extremely intelligent guy, extremely good at what he did. But I was sort of a little bit, wow, it's weird. Why doesn't he want to answer it? And so I'd also come across Robert Wolff, and so I sent basically the identical email off to Robert Wolff. And I got a response, not from Robert Wolff directly. Robert Wolff is, I don't know, 90 years old or something, but from his PA, who said, Robert Wolff doesn't use a computer, but here is a response. And he'd done an amazing response. He'd got into quite a lot of detail, and he basically agreed with everything that I'd said, more or less, and said he wanted to put it on his website. And then he finished up by saying, why don't you call me? And included his number. Now, he lives in America, and at this point, I'm in Saudi Arabia, literally the other side of the world. There are huge time differences. And so he suggested the time, because he gave what was his evening time that he accepts calls from people. And it was like 5 a.m. or even earlier for me. So I thought, whoa, brilliant opportunity. So I emailed back, exchanged quite a few emails with his PA, who became quite a good friend of mine as we were discussing this. So I said I will speak to Robert, but I need to get organized first. Remember, my strategy is to have a plan. And so I spent some time planning. I created 4 questions, which I thought nailed it, absolutely nailed it. They were incredibly well crafted, in my opinion, and if I got those 4 answered, I thought, yeah, that'll do, right? I'm there. And the first question was about the dual perspective, which I've spent decades of my life experientially verifying that it is the real McCoy. I can understand virtually any situation with this dual perspective. So I wake up at 5 o'clock or so in the morning, read through my questions, get myself prepared, um, and then I've got a summary of the questions so that I know what I want to say, but I'm not reading from a sheet of paper, so that I don't want to just have a dictation session with him, right? I asked my first question about the how does he see the validity of this dual standpoint, and I expect him to say, yeah, sounds pretty good, and you need this in order to be able to match the relative to the absolute, which is what it does. I was a bit surprised. He dismissed it out of hand. He he said, well, according to Ajata, which is what he teaches, according to Ajata, that's the teaching that there is no creation. According to Ajata, there is no dual standpoint. You don't need it. It's irrelevant. And I'm sort of, what? Then there's no dual standpoint. How do you deal with reality? It just really blew me apart. I just couldn't get my head around how you could not have a dual standpoint, but how you could still function at this level. So I made some notes on his response next to my question on a piece of paper so I could go through it later. And I read my second question, which again, I'd written out 4 very profound, very well-worded questions. He'd already trashed the first question, totally dismissed it out of hand. And I start with my second really well-prepared question, and his response to me was, I wrote it down here somewhere, well, you're bringing the discussion down to the relative again. If you want, we can do that. To which my response was, no, I don't want. I don't want to bring it down to the relative. I want the real McCoy. I want the truth. I want you and me to talk on the higher level, not the relative. So I tried to reword my question in order to make it not relative, because that was what he said. I'm bringing it back down to the relative. And then it dawned on me that actually I can't. Any question, it doesn't matter how carefully worded, it doesn't matter what I ask, any question is relative. So I tried and failed to reword my questions, and we spent about 30 minutes, mostly with me grappling around, trying to ask him a question that he couldn't just dismiss as being the relative. And then I left the questions because I realized it was futile. These carefully crafted questions weren't worth the paper that they were written on. So that was quite a big letting go for me. I've got decades of metaphysical experience, and I've got hours of preparation onto these 4 questions, and he's just trashed them. So there's a huge amount of letting go there, and I'm now on a live international line to one of these great spiritual masters, and I've got nothing left to say because my questions are written off. So I do what I do under those conditions, and in mystical terms, you'd say abiding I am. Me, as a metaphysical explanation, I've already described how you do your reasoning A, B, C, and then you wait for D. So I waited. I was aware, and I just waited for the next reasonable thing to pop into my head. And what came in was ants. One of my questions, I don't want to go into the question because it's quite a sophisticated discussion and it'd take me half an hour or more to talk about it. But one of the questions was to do with the question of either centralized or decentralized intelligence. And the example that I used was ants. I'd always been fascinated by ants. I'd spent a long time watching them, speculating. There must be some centralized mind in control of this colony of apparently autonomous little ants. And my question was a detailed analysis of that, but my questions weren't any use to me here. So I just said to Robert, ants. I've been fascinated by ants, and I didn't really have any question there, but immediately he said, "Oh, so am I. I was fascinated by ants too." And we were now talking about a very profound metaphysical question: centralized versus decentralized intelligence. What that means is God an individual? Effectively, that's, you know, a layman's summary of it. And we were talking about it in terms of ants. So we we continued, and afterwards we reached the end of the conversation, and I thanked him for his time, hung up. But before I did so, he said, "If I have any more questions, call him back." So I hang up and I'm reflecting on what a competent, confident, awe-inspiring personality he was, but at the same time so humble and patient. When I was stumped, there was no pressure on me to come up with a question. He was just there, just waiting. And so I spent 30 minutes or so reviewing this. And I tried during that time to rephrase a single one of my questions in terms of not being a dualistic question. And of course, it's impossible. I couldn't. I'd realized it dimly as I first had my first question dismissed, and now increasingly it became apparent to me. Um, and so I had what you could call a flash. I had a flash of inspiration, if you like, that's the end of seeking. I have literally got nothing left to ask, and therefore I'm not seeking anymore. And this was like dropping a huge weight off of my shoulders, the weight of seeking. But that wasn't the entirety of the realization. This was like, in terms of my ABC, I had my ABC. This was like my D. But having had a flash, which gave me the D, that would be like waiting for the next step to come. After a pause, the next step comes, but then you're looking for your next step, and so you pause, and you're abiding in being. You're aware, but you're not aware of anything. You're just waiting for the next idea, the next thought. You're literally in the stillness, waiting for the activity which you grasp and bring down to earth, as I've described. And everything began to click into place. I got not only my D, that was the flash, but then I got the E, the F, the G, and so on. Everything just clicked into place. And I actually wrote an email. I like to refer to the email rather than talking out of memory, because of course memories are unreliable. The more you remember things, the more you flower it, and so on. This is an email that I wrote to Catherine, Roberts' PA. It was about an hour after the realization. This is how I described what I'd realized. Whatever is it. So one must accept what is as it is. This includes oneself and the appearance of a world. Literally, it's already all okay. If it's already all okay, then no action is required to make it better. No action could possibly make it better, and no action could possibly make it worse. Because it's all okay, then I need to do nothing, but I am free to do as I wish, and the outcome of any action will, of course, be okay. Now, I wrote this down as I was realizing it at the time, but I was also quite aware that it's easy, particularly when you're on your own in your own world of thought, so to speak, to fall into a circle of self-delusion. And this is something that I've always been aware of, I've always been on guard of. And so I phoned Robert back and I said to him, "I think I get it, but it's just too simple. Is it really as simple as whatever is it? Can it really be that simple?" And I explained the realization that I'd had, and I'd made notes of how I could rationally frame it. And his response was, "Absolutely. It, it really is as simple as that, but people just don't get it. You can tell them that it's as simple as that, but people want it to be more difficult. They can't accept that it's so simple." And so he hadn't told me that. I deduced that from the conversation, and it was my deduction, it was my realization. And when he confirmed this for me, that's when it all just snapped into place. I had actually achieved the end of seeking. He'd not actually told me, he'd responded in such a way that I deduced it for myself, and I finished my seeking. So my reaction to this was just awesome. The relief, it's like having carried a huge big bag of seeking for all these years. I could just drop the bag. It just didn't matter. I don't need to seek because I've already found the end point. Literally, it's as simple as that. It's all okay. No action required to make it better. No action could make it worse. And it's been confirmed by Robert Wolff that this is a genuine realization. So I spent time after that reviewing it and putting it down into more concrete words. And I thought, well, I want a record of this because I know that when you play back memories in the future, things change. So I wrote an email off to Catherine. This is Robert's PA. And I described how I'd spoken to Robert Wolff, and I described the realization. That's more or less what I've just read is from the email that I sent her. And I finished off the email with the statement that it's an hour or so after our conversation now, and I just can't stop grinning. I just want to hug everybody. It's shockingly simple after 30 years or more of seeking to realize it's all okay. And she replied to me, and she said, "Dear Steve, this is so wonderful, your experience and how you describe the simple truth. Now I can't stop smiling. You're a natural transformer, thank you. Isn't it peculiar? Everything around us is exactly as it is, only we fall into duality." So she's realized it as well, and she's saying that I've transformed her, and all I've done is describe the effect that Robert Wolff has had on me, and she's been working with this guy, seeing him on a daily basis for, I don't know, months, years. And since then, this realization that everything is it has become increasingly more aligned with my metaphysical understanding. Literally, there is no separation. This is what I first realized. There's no separation. When we talk about, for example, non-duality, we typically sort of say that everything is from the source. We've got the unmanifest and the manifest, but that's duality. If you've got the source and whatever manifests from the source, you're talking in dualistic terms. You can't have an active and a passive without duality. So all my metaphysics in terms of the world mind, it's all on a lower level. It's all dualistic to think about the world mind and the creation. It's a very subtle duality, but nonetheless, it's still a duality. Whereas now, having thrown away all the ideas, having realized that all the ideas were relative, sorry, man, that allowed me to actually step beyond that to realize that this is it. Everything you see around you is the manifestation of I can't even use words to describe it. It's the manifestation of reality, but it is of reality. It's not two things. One is the static reality, and one is the illusion. That's just not it. The fact is that everything around us, this is reality, although it's reality expressed in this form that we see as three-dimensional space-time, if you like. It is an expression of reality, and so it is of reality, and it is reality. There is no separation, there is no illusion, there is no maya, if you like. The illusion, what's illusion, is not the appearance, it's not the cosmos that we're in, it's the separation. When we see things as if they are separate, that's the illusion, the separation. So the cosmos, this coffee, whatever you want to take, is reality is non-dual reality, but it's appearing in this form. It's appearing as if it's limited, and that's what I say, as if. It appears to me as if I am a separate person, but I'm not actually a separate person. The example I often talk about is a pencil stuck in water. It appears as if it's bent, but I know for a fact that it's not bent. The actuality is different to the appearance. And so when I look at the objects around me, when I look at a pencil, I can describe it in either as it would appear to have certain size, dimensions, and properties, or I can describe it as it is. It is non-dual reality. It just appears to me through my human perception as if it's a finite thing. That appearing as finite, that's the appearance, that's the as if, that's the illusion. See through the appearance of separate forms to the reality that's underneath. And that's what I've done. And that's what I described as all that is it. Everything that is. The pencil is. The pencil is an apparent form. The form is the illusion, but the actual pencil, the reality, is there as the pencil. And it's paradoxical. It's paradoxical to reasoning. Previously, I'd used the dual standpoint in order to... I'll play Dark Souls with you in a minute, Mike. Let me finish the video. It's paradoxical to reasoning, and that's how I'd managed to handle things with the dual perspective, that you could simultaneously hold two paradoxical positions. The pencil appears to be a form, and that's a manifestation of reality. The pencil is a pencil. But you could also view it from a different level, and you could say in absolute terms, the pencil is reality, it's not a pencil. But in the dual standpoint, it is literally dual. It is two, it is therefore a duality. Whereas what I realized after having spoke to Robert Wolff is that there is no separation, there is no duality. It is literally one and the same. It may appear to reason to be paradoxical, but hey, reality don't have to conform to my thinking, right? I've been used to reality not conforming to my thinking for long enough. And reality is what it is. And what reality is all this. It's all this and more. It's all this here and now. In the next moment, it's another all this. It's timeless, unlimited, boundless, all these negative descriptions of what it's not. It's all that and more, because simultaneously it's all of this as well. And our language fails to grasp it, but once you realize it, it's so simple. It really is so simple. And that's why the way that I present this understanding, this realization, is there is no separation, period. Anytime you think there's a separation, you're wrong. Back up. You've made a mistake. Step back. There is no separation. There is no separation, period. That's it. And the reason why it took me so long to realize that is because we look at things as being much more difficult than they are. It is so simple, and yet it's too simple. It's so simple that we overlook it because we've been conditioned by our life, by our experience, by our sensory perception. We've been conditioned to believe in separate things. So that's it, really. It is so simple. Now, unfortunately, it's a very difficult thing to explain. What does it mean to say there's no separation? But if you could just understand that there is no separation, then there's no more questions, right? Hi, I'm back for part 2. What I thought I'd do is I would describe the experience of living post-realization. An experience is the key word. Life is an experience. Experiences still happen. If I experience, for example, looking at a pencil or a coffee cup, I'm aware of the form, but I'm also aware of it as a manifestation of reality. I think I described that last time. If I was experiencing this mystically, I would have to lose the appearance of the forms in order to experience the oneness. That's what we call a mystical experience. You go into meditation, or you're swept away by the moment and you only experience oneness. But what I experience now is simultaneously oneness and many. Because the example of the pencil, you see a pencil as bent when it's poked into water, but you intellectually know that it's straight and there's no conflict. When I see a separate pencil, I know that it's not separate. I know the separation is the illusion. I still perceive the illusion. I still experience it as if bent, like you see the pencil bent. I still experience it as separate, but I know that it's not, and there's no conflict. There's no paradox. It just is. It's simply how things appear to be, which is different to how things really are. Now, what that means in terms of experience, living as a human being, is that I still see and experience the world. But I don't add suffering onto it. So something arises in the moment and then it's past. It's not sticky. That's the phrase that I like to use. It's not sticky. It doesn't get dragged out across time. That's psychological suffering. So I'm going to use a couple of experiences. I'm going to go back to before I was realized to illustrate a formative experience. What I mean by this is that reality provides each individual human with exactly what they need at exactly the right time. Apparently miraculously, it's as if this world full of multiple individuals is tailor-made for me. My experience is tailor-made for me, but the universe isn't. So let's use an example. Before I was realized, when I was in Africa fishing in my early 20s, I've already got a grasp on a lot of metaphysical principles. I'm coming to grasps with some pretty high level metaphysics, but it's not realized. It's an academic understanding. But remember that I apply my metaphysics to my experience. And of course, there's a lot of mundane experiences when you can't really see the learning happening. But then periodically throughout your life, you get these significant experiences where you can see learning happening either at the time or in review afterwards. One such experience was when I was a fisherman. It was a beautiful day. It was in the rainy season. Three of us on the boat. I'm the captain, I've got my crewman and one tourist. He's actually an author, he's a friend of mine, I've taken him fishing many times. He writes for a local newspaper, nothing famous. And we've been fishing, we've had a great day's fishing, but it's in the rainy season. And we're about a mile and a half offshore. 5 miles down the coastline, you can see this huge storm. It's been there all day. I've been keeping an eye on it, but it's been stationary. We'd pack up normally in about half an hour, 3/4 of an hour, and I notice the storm starts to move. So I said to the tourist, Don, I said to him, we've had great days fishing. What I suggest is we pack up early and we go home. We get home nice and dry and we sit in the cafe drinking hot tea and watch the rain. If you prefer, we can stay here for another half an hour or so and get thoroughly drenched on the way back. Your choice. So he says, that's a great idea, let's go home. So we quickly pull up the anchor and set off back. But the storm that's been stationary all day is now moving an awful lot faster than I'd at first appreciated, and it catches us. Before we get back to the harbour, it catches us. So what you've got is this sudden intense tropical storm. We got huge 8-foot waves. We're only in a 20-foot boat. These waves are towering over us. Worse than that, we've got incredibly heavy rain. Worse than that, we've got an incredibly strong wind. So the wind makes the rain almost horizontal. It's like pellets of ice striking you from a shotgun or something. You can't see when you're trying to look into it. It's freezing cold. We're in shorts and t-shirt. It's freezing cold. We're literally shaking with the cold. And even worse, the rain is hitting the sea so hard that it's forming froth, and the wind is frothing it up. You've got about 12 inches of foam on top of the sea. Now, I know the physics of density. Boats don't float on foam because it's 99% air. So the boat, to look at it, it's 12 inches lower than it should be because it's floating in the water with 12 inches of foam on top that just rises up the side of the boat. It's a 20-foot fiberglass boat with an outboard on the back, so the back of the boat is lower because that's where the engine hangs. We got about an inch of clearance before the water on the back of the boat's literally just lopping into the boat, the foam. That's not bad. I can manage with that. I could get us out of there. But what's bad is that the rain is falling so quickly. I hadn't realised the front anchor well was open. In our rush to get back before the rain, the slightly inexperienced boatman had pulled the anchor, but he'd left the hatch open on the front, and so it's filling up with rain at a really incredible rate. By the time I notice it, the front of the boat's weighted down by all this rainwater trapped in the front. Now what that means is the nose is going down. Normally a boat, if the engine's on the back here, the boat goes like this as the engine pushes it forward, but because we've got all this weight, we're going like this. Now the bilge pump pumps water out the back, but because our nose is down, the rainwater that falls on the whole area of the boat is rolling up to the front of the boat, accumulating under the deck where we can't get at it with a bucket, but the pump is up at the back in the air, sucking air. So the physics determine the boat is going down. I know this, it's obvious, but even worse, if we do go down, we've got life jackets. Well, we've got one life jacket, the tourist's got a life jacket, and it won't help you. You're dead because you can't breathe the foam. Your body will float like the boat in the water underneath the foam, but your head will be underneath the foam and you'll be breathing water and you will drown. And it will be an extremely unpleasant, very slow, very painful death. Now, I'm not going to tell anybody this, but I know this. I know this. This is inevitable. This is what's going to happen. A bit like the Titanic, as I've said. Now, in this situation, I'm absolutely terrified. I am literally shaking with fear. Luckily, it's that cold. We're all shaking anyway. You can't tell. I'm literally shaking with fear because I know what's going to happen. And in that situation, this is a life-forming time, right? In that situation, I think of my metaphysics and realize that I'm in this situation by powers that are out of my control. I'm not in control. I never have been in control. I have the illusion of being in control. I'm still able to act, but at the end of the day, it's not in my control. If I'm going to die, I'm going to die. And if I'm not going to die, then it's not in my control. But in Islam, we have this excellent saying, trust in God but tie the camel. So you're not in control, but you do what you can, and then you're not in control of the outcomes. So this is what I'm thinking, and suddenly I find us in the eye of the storm. Now you've probably heard the eye of the storm. It's an expression, but it's absolutely true. We're in the middle of this storm, and because we are literally in the middle, the wind's going around us. We're not actually in wind anymore. We're in a calm spot. There's still huge waves on the sea, but the rain is now a lot less aggressive. It's not in your face. We can actually pause to think. And the boat's still going down. We can't stop that. But what I realise is that we're all going to die unless I can get us out of here. I'm going to come up with the best plan I can, but I'm not going to be responsible, and we're just going to see what happens. And the best plan I can come up with is I'm going to turn the tail of the boat into the waves behind us. The waves are coming at us from behind, and they're going to wash us up to the shore. I'm going to surf the boat in. Now, on the face of it, that's blooming crazy because we've already only got an inch of clearance at the back. If I've got an 8-foot wave coming at us from the back, it'll swamp us. But because of the dynamics, the way that the nose of the boat's going down, the engine at the back, I've been losing power and losing steering because the engine's not in the water. And so the only way I can get steering is to get this wave behind us that'll submerge the propeller of the engine. I'll be able to drive the boat, surf it on the edge of the wave into the beach. So I tell the guys what we're going to do, and they can see that it might just work. And I do it. When the first wave hits, I turn the back of the boat in towards the waves. Absolutely crazy, right? The thing that you do when you're in charge of a small boat is you keep your nose into the waves. Nope. I turn my back to the waves, and as the first wave hits us, but this 8-foot wave towering over us, it's higher than our heads. It's a huge, big wave. So just about to crash into the boat, and we all go into the water. I throttle up the engine because as the wave hits, the engine's in the water, I get power, and I surface just in front of this wave with this great big wave behind us, breaking up at the top of the wave, surface into the beach, and we make it. So what I did there was I consciously gave up control. Under pressure, I consciously gave up control, realizing that you're never in control anyway. You only ever have the illusion of control to begin with. So and that was a learning experience that reinforced to me experientially. And you can say, no, it was just an experience. There was no meaning to it. It was all just by chance. So let's use another example. Let's use an example from post-realization. I was, at the time, after I'd spoken to Robert Wolf, I was sitting pretty in Saudi. I was on a £100,000 a year contract, living in an all expenses paid villa. Financially, I was at the peak of my career. But I know that in order for these life-changing experiences to happen, you need to put yourself into situations. And so what I decided to do was I'm going to move. I'm going to move in order to give life the opportunity to either verify my understanding through experience or correct my understanding through experience, right? And so I decided we're going to move. Apparently miraculously, within a very short period of time of me deciding this, a friend of mine calls me and says his school is looking for a physics teacher, recommends the school. And so I intuitively, having spoke to this guy, I know this is the one. I haven't applied for any jobs, and it's a very tight window. It's the start of the summer holiday. There's like a couple of weeks or so left of the term, and then it's the summer holiday. All the schools are closed, and it's the new year, new academic year. I've got 4 kids in school. I need to be in a job in a week or so. I need to have the contract sorted out, or it's not going to happen because I can't pull my kids out of school and change school mid-year. I'm just not going to do that. But I know that if it's meant to happen, it's meant to happen, and I'm going to go with the flow. So I write an email, send it off to school, CC the personal address of the principal and the school. School admin write back and say, we're on holiday now, the school's closed, your application will be reviewed by the principal when he returns. Now to me that means it's too late. I'm not going to begin an application at the beginning of the academic year, so that's it. But the next day I get an email from the principal, just by chance, again apparently miraculously. He decided to check his work email and came across my email. He's extremely interested in my CV. Experienced physics teachers are hard enough to find, so I usually get the jobs that I apply for. And he wants me, and so we do an interview and agree a package and all the rest of it. I'm in communication with the school about the visas. Normally a school gets the visa. This is the experience that I'm working my way around to. In this case, there's a miscommunication. I assumed the school as normal will get the visa. It doesn't work that way though. They want me to get the visa, but they kind of didn't make it clear to me. By the time I ask the question, who's getting the visa, and they say, well, you are, it's very, very late in the day. I look on the website for the Pakistan visa. It says it takes 4 to 6 weeks. Now I've got 1 to 2 weeks in which to do this. And also the problem is that it's coming up to the Hajj holiday. So once the Hajj holiday starts in Saudi Arabia, everything stops. There's no way. So I have a very, very short time frame to get this thing in place. So it's 4 to 6 weeks, and it gives me a list of official documents that I need, all of which I need originals. I need original from Karachi from the Chamber of Commerce. I need an original from Karachi from the Ministry of the Interior. I need an original from Karachi from the school. I need an original from Saudi Arabia Chamber of Commerce, and I've got none of them. And to get a document like that would take weeks, particularly so close to Hajj, the biggest Islamic festival of the year. But I know that if I'm meant to get this job, I'm going to get the visa. Now the problem is I've already resigned my job irrevocably. I've packed up my job on the strength of getting this new job because I've already agreed a contract with the principal and it should work. But if I don't get the visa, I'm not going to get the job. So I need the visa and I need it quick. Now the only way I can do this is to go in person. It's only available in this capital city. It's a long drive, so we have to leave at 3 in the morning. We leave, we drive down there. I get there and I come to the clerk. He's in a big office, loads of people all harassing and quarrelling about visas and all the rest of it. He's the only guy on charge and he's obviously looking very stressed, very harrowed. So I come up, calmly greet him, salam alaikum, and tell him what I want. I'd like a visa for me and my family. Now I've completed the paperwork. There's about half an inch of paper there. There's 20 odd sheets each, and there's 6 of us. He thumbs through the corner of the paperwork and says, "No." I said, "What do you mean, no?" He says, "No, you can't even apply for a visa, never mind get a visa." I said, "Why? All the paperwork is there." He said, "Yeah, but none of it is originals." And he starts to count off all the originals I need. Now, of course, everything's fallen apart. As far as I'm concerned, if I don't get this visa, I'm screwed big time. So the anger, the frustration, the blame, and everything else arises, but because it's not sticky to me, it arises and it's gone in a moment, in an instant, it just passes. So instead of, like everybody else in the room, blaming this guy, I'm just detached, I'm just cool, I'm all right with that. And so by the time he's finished his sentence telling me all the things I haven't got, I've already processed it. And so as he finishes, I just look him in the eye and I smile at him and I say, "But you can help me, can't you?" And it was like a Jedi mind trick. This harassed guy, he just smiled and I knew I'd got him. And he said, "I'll see what I can do. I'll talk to the consul, and if you're lucky, he might allow you to send your paperwork down by post rather than having to come down again. And if you're really lucky, he might even agree to interview you now." So I said to him, "Ask the consul to give me an interview whilst I'm here, because I've travelled a long way." And he goes and sees the consul, who agrees to interview me. I speak to the consul. At the end, having done his interview, he says, "Well, Mr. Robinson, you haven't got any of the paperwork that I need in originals to grant you the work visa for yourself and the visit visas for your family." I say, "Yeah, I know." He says, "So what do you think?" I says, "I don't know. What could you suggest? You know the system more than me. How can you help me?" He says, "Well, I can give you a visit visa." He said, "And what's more, I've decided that since you've come from so far away, I'm going to get you the visit visa today. Come back at 2:30 for your passports." So on the website, according to the facts, I don't have any of the paperwork, and it's a 4 to 6 weeks processing time. I've gone in and got it in a day. Now you might say, "Oh, well, that was just a sequence of events that just happened to fall that way." So let me talk about another, again connected with the same job, the same application process. And remember, I've consciously gone through this in order to provide life a teaching opportunity. So another example, there are several. I'm just going to pick one. A guy called Bruce works for the company, and he's in charge of all sorts of things, and he's an odd job man. And one of his jobs is to deliver water. He's delivering a truckload of water into the office where I'm sat. I'm free at the time. I'm wearing my suit, which is my normal teaching attire. And so I see him unloading all these boxes manually. He wheels them in on a big cart, and he's physically humping them off of the cart. So I take my jacket off, roll my sleeves up, and muck in and help him. Now I know Bruce because he's a unique position. He probably doesn't even know my name. There's hundreds of us teachers, so to speak. So I just help him. No reason. It's just what you do, you just help a fella. And a couple of weeks later, it's now back into this visa application process. I've done all the paperwork. I've jumped through all the hoops. I've done everything humanly possible. And it's the last day before the Hajj holiday, and I'm on my final exit interview. I've done everything, and then half an hour before closing time, the HR guy comes to me and says, "Steve, there's a problem." I said, "Oh, what's that?" He says, "This paper has to be signed by 2 Saudi generals." I said, "Well, what's that to do with me?" He said, "Well, Bruce normally does it. The only person that knows where they are and deals with them is Bruce, and Bruce is refusing to answer his phone all day. I think he's already gone. I think he's done one because it's the last day of the term and Bruce is like his own boss." So he gives me Bruce's number, he gives me the paper. I says, "Well, where do they work?" He says, "I don't know." I says, "Well, what's the names?" He says, "Well, I can tell you in Arabic," and he writes down these Arabic names. So I've got 2 generals of an unknown location. I've got 30 minutes to find them. If they're still on site, they've probably done one as well. They're generals. Why would they stay till the end of the day? I ring Bruce, no reply. Ring Bruce, no reply. So I send him a text. I said to him, "Bruce, this is Steve. You don't know me, but I helped you unload the truck the other day." I said, "I'm stuck. I need your help." And I said, "I need this visa, and I need it now. And if I don't get these generals' signatures, I'm fucked." So my phone rings, and it's Bruce, and I start to explain the story to him, and he says, meet me in the car park in 10 minutes. He said, I've got to drive back. He said, I'm not on site anymore. So I'm 20 minutes away from the actual building, and I've not got a car, I'm on foot. And it's hot, so I start walking back, thinking, I'm going to get back there in 10 minutes. I'm meeting Bruce in 10 minutes, and it's a 20-minute walk. First car that passes me pulls up and says, do you want a lift? I hadn't even put my thumb out, he's just, yeah, of course do. I told him where I'm going. He said, I'm going right past, I'll drop you outside. So he drops me literally where I'm meeting Bruce. Bruce turns up in his truck, screeches to a halt, winds down his window. I start to explain. He says, shut up, Steve, don't waste time. We've got minutes. Give me the paper. I give him the paper. He screams away with his spinning his wheels and disappears. Then, after a while, he phones me and says, I've got the signatures. You can get the visa. So, again, you could say that all of that is just as a random sequence of events. But each individual event can be written off randomly, but when you put it all together, it becomes a convincing body of evidence, and that's the point. It's not an objective proof. No matter what experience I was to tell to anybody, they can always, oh, it's just pure chance, it could have happened to anybody. But when it happens to you, and it happens to you time and time and time again, and when it happens to you in a way that you can actually predict that it's going to happen, you don't know how it's going to happen. I didn't know how I was going to get the visa. I didn't know how I was going to get the signatures, but I knew that I would. When you know that you will, and again, apparently miraculously, everything falls into place, then that becomes an experiential verification. And what it verifies to me is that the reality that we experience is not as it would appear to be. Even if you believe in a mentalistic type universe where everything is made of consciousness, if you believe that they're separate things, or you believe that you're in control, then these things can't happen. They just simply don't happen in an idealistic or a materialistic way of interpreting things. It's only when you realize that actually these forms are not really the separate independent objects that they appear to be. They're actually just forms of the one reality. When you realize that, then your world becomes a much more flexible place. And it's that flexibility. Miraculous things can and do happen in mundane life. You can't prove it. You can't show somebody. You don't take a pencil and the pencil bends. It's not like the Matrix where I can wave a spoon in front of you and say there is no spoon. Yeah, there is a spoon, but the spoon is not a separate thing. There's no separate spoon, right? So these are just a few of my experiences of what it's like to live as a realized individual. I realized that the world is not as it would appear to be, and my experience can verify that experientially. In terms of subjectivity, like what's it like, because I know there's no difference between the apparent separate and the actual one, I can shift between the two. It's like a continuum. If I'm focusing on something like making a video like this, or writing an assessment, or marking a piece of homework, or any of these things, at the time I function as an individual. My attention focuses on the separate self, or the apparent separate self. It's really, of course, an embedded self. It's an embedded part of the whole. It's not separate at all. But I can focus my attention on this apparently separate self and function as a separate self. But then, when I don't need to, I can relax the attention. I can relax the focus onto the whole, and it's just still. It's just peace. I can experience the peace, and I can experience closely connected reaction to the peace. Now, the way that I express that is to say that the bliss is a reaction to the peace. The bliss is the realization that I am not in control. I do not have the responsibility. I have the freedom to act, but I'm not responsible for the results of the action. It's a very subtle point. I'm responsible for the action, but I'm not responsible for the outcome of the action. I have to do what I can, but then what happens as a result of what I can do. That's not in my control. So I'm not responsible, but I am free. And it's such a wonderful, wonderful way to interpret your life. So you can slide along the scale almost effortlessly. You can slide between function as an individual or just peace and bliss. And the closing point, it's so simple. This is what I keep on coming back to. It's really so simple. It's so natural. There is no separation. If you could get that, you've nailed it. That's the point. But as Robert Wolfe said, we don't like to see things simply. We just have to put our thinking on top of it and make things a lot more difficult than it actually is.